Tax reform in 2017, that is exactly what we are laying the groundwork for. We come off just about 4.5 years of a pretty solid foundation on moving toward 2017. And the way I describe it is tax reform only happens once a generation. It's a bit like running a marathon. If you think about the 30 years or so, but we are in the last 2 miles of that marathon. How we run 2016 is critical to how we finish in 2017, and the momentum we come off and are building from is the foundation that was laid through the years that Chairman Camp worked on both his working groups and drafts, the work that Paul Ryan did on international tax and trying to forge progress there, which he did. We have new rules in scorekeeping that recognize the dynamic impacts, the real-life economic impacts of tax reform and tax cuts. And then we have the PATH Act, making permanent so many of those provisions that have been temporary for so many years. All that really creates a very solid foundation going forward. This year, what we are working on very aggressively is to sort of narrow the differences on issues like international tax reform, to see if we can't move something in an environment that's, a presidential year. But every day that we take a step toward narrowing the tax differences and finding a real solution to permanent territorial system is a good week spent and a good time spent. Secondly, we are working with our tax policies subcommittee and the new tax reform task force to engage our entire conference in this effort. And what I've said is, I want a tax code built for growth. I want it built for the growth of families' paychecks, for the growth of our businesses, for the growth of the U.S. economy. And I want our committee and conference to think bold about this. This only happens once a generation. We're not going to tweak the tax code and call it a day. The result of our work will have to be competitive for the next 30 years. So we have to think bold and we have to think fresh. And what I use the Steve Jobs analogy when he was brought back to rescue Apple, took a look at their products, and his charge to his team was, when you're behind, leapfrog. In other words, don't do all this work just to get to the middle of the pack. It doesn't work. And on tax reform, that's exactly what we're doing. We're taking a leapfrog approach. We know competitively around the world where we're not and how other countries are moving away from us in their competitiveness. So we're not going to do all this work, policy and political, to get to the middle of the pack. We're going to go toward the lead pack on this because we think it's critical going forward. We also, I've asked our team to think fresh. To look at tax reform beyond Reagan-style reforms, which are critical, but looking at ways we can move toward consumption. How do we simplify the tax code significantly? How do we make sure it's understandable? And the principles, Mark, with your permission, I'll sort of finish with the principles I've laid out for our team in conference, which is, one, we need a tax code that's fair and flatter and simpler. What we have today meets none of those criteria at all. Secondly, we're going to have to close loopholes, exclusions, exemptions in order to lower taxes for everybody. We can't keep everything we've got and lower rates as well. It just doesn't work. Thirdly, I want to make sure that small businesses aren't paying more than larger businesses, so we are not going to leave pass-throughs behind in this discussion. Job creators are job creators. We need to make sure they're competitive. That rate they have is competitive, whether they're competing on Main Street in Dallas or they're competing in Doha or around the world. We need them competitive. I want a tax code that is driven by economic growth. And our final point, I want to make sure as well that we're not encouraging companies to locate jobs, headquarters, manufacturing, or research overseas because the tax code pushes them to do that. And the final point is we're not going to bail out Washington's spending problems with tax reform. We're going for growth, not for tax revenue, but I'm convinced you get businesses investing, you get jobs being created, you'll generate the tax revenue that goes with pro-growth tax reform. And so we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a really talented group in the Ways and Means. We're going to need your help and input as we go forward. But I joined the Economic Committee, and coming from a Chamber of Commerce background in 3 different economies, much different from each other. I look back a half a century in America, and if you look at the elements that drive private sector job growth, jobs along Main Street, it's not government spending, it's not tax rates themselves alone. It is when the tax code encourages investment. When you invest in buildings, equipment, and software, when you have the mobility with your capital to invest, recover it quickly, and reinvest, you drive jobs in a major way. And so that's going to, along with rates, going to be a key part of our tax reform effort. So with that, be glad to stop and take some questions or input.
Thank you. You just don't know how happy you made me. Just talk about. And I think what we don't want to have is don't want to have a foreign tax, like a foreign add-on value-added tax. We want, as we discussed earlier, a Benjamin Franklin tax, where we reward savers. And I think that's, I really appreciate. But let's open it up for questions. Who would like to go first? And identify yourself, please.
Chairman Wes Cool and Washington Council.
Hey Wes, good to see you.
Give us a sense of what you're hearing from other members in the conference. Obviously, getting it through the committee, I think will be a good task, but also getting it through the full House is going to be a big effort list. How other members are telling you about what they want to do tax reform.
Yeah, they're starved for tax reform. I mean, honestly, that's why they came here. Yeah. And the truth is, we tend to squabble over the small issues. We unite behind the bigger ones. And we have members and we've made a conscious effort to spotlight all the different types of taxation, whether it is a fair tax, a flat tax, the cash flow tax from Devin Nunes. We just highlighted a couple of Reagan-style reforms. So we're trying to get members a chance to make their case, but also to learn about there is no perfect way to tax. There's not. But there's proven ways to create investment and grow investment and savings. And so what I hear from our members is this is where I'd like us to go, but just know we're all in for tax reform. They're really hungry because they hear it back home in a major way. So I think we're in a good place. Just like overall tax reform, it's a challenge to sort of build that consensus, but we expect in June to outline a blueprint for where House Republicans want to go on tax reform. So.
Somebody else? Yes, Gary?
Yeah, Gary asked.
Yeah, Gary.
Just, again, your sense of how this plays out from a practical point of view. Blueprint comes out in June. This is kind of what you run on a little bit, at least from the side.
Yeah, it is.
But just how's the coordination with the presidential campaigns? Or how do you see that playing out, either at the convention or beyond that? Again, depending on who wins and how that.
The blueprint won't be picking one presidential plan, over another. In fact, I'm pretty encouraged. Each of our presidential candidates on the Republican side have laid out a pretty serious tax reform proposal. And all of them have some element, very strong pro-growth elements. And so don't be surprised if from a number of those, end up in a blueprint because we're looking at the same thing. Lower rates, simpler code, more competitive, investment driven, all that. But what we're planning to do, Speaker Ryan's made the case, we need a positive agenda. House Republicans can run on. The presidential candidate yet to be named, will be running that campaign as well. We want a mandate in the House on these key issues, from tax reform to poverty and welfare reform to the whole get-go. And so we're going to run that approach in presidential. I think it'll dovetail pretty well. I think we're all going the same direction. May differ a little, but I don't think that's going to be significant. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Of course, Kathy.
Kathleen Blackett, Coca-Cola.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Yeah.
American companies that do a lot of business around the world are facing some really interesting tax challenges. From OECD, globally, but EU in particular.
Yeah.
What is it that we can do within your membership, either the committee or the conference, to help explain those pressures?
Explain those pressures.
Or
Yeah, because
share a story?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's really important because look, most members, we are paying attention to BEPS. We are paying attention to state aid investigations. We're paying attention to lower rates and innovation boxes and the field sort of running away from us on a competitiveness standpoint, and the new Treasury proposed rules as well. But most members of the conference aren't. You guys have tremendous credibility because you've got jobs back home they care about. And so just laying that out, and all of you, by the way, Catherine, you know from your days of Ways and Means, you know, being able to explain to a member and their staff who are engaged or aren't just what that impact is on your ability to create jobs and succeed, that's the whole trick. And as you know, once you can put these issues on the radar, in the impact it has on us, on our headquarter companies, on your competition, when you see the rest of the world making a revenue grab, when you see them pulling away from us on the competitive standpoint, in this case, even with Treasury regulations, where in effect, in their effort to build a wall to keep U.S. companies in, I think they've built a wall to keep investment out of our local U.S. communities. No one's more credible at doing that than you guys. So continue that educational effort, both obviously with the Ways and Means members, but in a broader sense. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, could you please identify?
Hi, Lauren Sheehan with AFPM.
Yeah.
I believe you've mentioned in the past that your approach to tax reform is kind of focusing on the pro-growth policies first and the issue of revenue neutrality second. And I wonder how you anticipate that impacting your process for tax reform, especially when you've been such a strong supporter of issues like accelerated depreciation,
Yeah.
and it also has obviously a pretty large price tag associated with it.
Yeah, I think we can stay revenue neutral within dynamic scoring. I think that's real life impacts. I think what we just did in the PATH Act on the permanence answers the question of what is the tax code, because that's what you start with in the math is what is it. We just answered that, essentially, and it gives us more space. So I think that'll provide us all the space that we need. But there's one caveat. We're not going to leave growth on the table because we're off a dime or two. We're going for the growth, and I think we're going to be pretty close on the dynamic scoring side of things. So sort of the assumption that we always get hit with, which is you're going to blow a hole in the deficit and these are tax cuts for the wealthy, neither in my view will be true. So
Let's continue. Who wants to go next? And you, sir, are?
I'm Dave Modi with Ingersoll Rand.
yeah, hey Dave.
As you talk about tax reform, you want it to be revenue neutral, but you look at the election, there's possibility of a Democratic Senate, a Democratic president, and probably fewer Republicans in the House. So the president says he's all for tax reform, but he wants it to be revenue enhancing. So how do you anticipate next year going forward if you have to deal with a stronger Democratic president that got 4 years in office instead of 8 months or whatever?
Yeah, and I think the key one is to know exactly where you want to go in a pro-growth tax code and lay that out and make that argument. Secondly, at the end of the day, regardless of the makeup of the House, the Senate, and the White House, tax reform is going to have bipartisan support, and so it is. And so looking for that common ground, as we did with the PATH Act, is going to be part of that whole process. I don't think tax reform will be bipartisan every step of the way, but it doesn't need to be. At the end of the day, it will. And so, what we're seeing, from some Democrats on the committee is a recognition we need to broaden the base and lower the rates. From others, a recognition in the Senate as well that we cannot continue this worldwide system of taxation. And so I think we've got some foundation to build off of. So won't be easy either way. Tax reform is tough, and composition could make it tougher, but we're moving forward. So.
And you, ma'am?
Kathy Berry with Mayor.
Yeah, hey Kathy.
So When we put our binoculars on and look past a blueprint this summer and past August recess, are there any markers or goals you can share with us about what the committee hopes to accomplish before the end of the year? I know that
Yeah.
the timing will be tight, but is there anything we should be looking for in that time window in terms of progress once the blueprint's out and discussion starts on
Yeah.
what you all are thinking about?
You know, we're continuing work on the international tax side to see if we can't find some common ground, especially on a permanent territorial system. One, narrowing it would make a big difference so we can focus on rates and investment and simplification going forward. That actually would be hugely helpful just by itself. But if we can find that consensus, we're going to move it out of committee. I don't have a timetable. We're sort of letting the policy drive the timing of all that, and as it will in overall tax reform. We're also we have a blueprint to deliver, but there are in the realm of fresh ideas. You know, we're looking at the whole range of pro-growth policies, and I'm going to want to have time to be able to follow those through, to model them, to get real-world applications. Again, we're not going to just tweak a few things, and so this year's going to be a lot of time spent on the pro-growth policy side of things. Okay, we live in a different world, you know, and we want to make sure this code is extremely pro-growth, not just for 5 years. And so that's got us thinking farther ahead. Do you agree with that approach?
Sounds great.
Who else wants to weigh in? I mean, this is a chance. Anybody over here? You, sir, are?
Kevin Avery with ConocoPhillips.
Good to see you, Kevin.
Good to see you, Mr.
Thanks.
Chairman. Question I have is how much in the way of coordination of your blueprint will you have with the Senate? Going into a political season, having two disparate sounds, the Senate has an integration proposal that they're working on.
Yeah.
So how much coordination do you think you'll have, or unanimity of both houses on your plan?
You know, I don't think the Senate's going to lay out a similar blueprint. I think it's encouraging that Chairman Hatch is continuing to work on sort of the international tax side of things, how you become more competitive, and as opposed to Treasury rules, how do you address the core problem? I think that's complementary to what we're doing. You know, the House will lay out a broader blueprint. My guess is it will represent a lot of the goals, aspirational goals of the Senate. And so I think complementary works in 2016.
One last question, because the chairman's on a tight schedule. If not,
There's
is there
one.
one? Okay, so sorry, sir.
Hey,
please.
sir, Rob Guido with BP.
Yeah, right.
So it's kind of tax day, April 15th.
It is.
Yeah, in addition to international, do you see IRS reform, administrative reform, as one area where Democrats and Republicans can work together, short of comprehensive tax reform, but getting good policy on the books to reform the IRS?
It should be. It probably won't be in the short term, all because of the IRS conduct and behavior over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, I remember many years where I couldn't tell you from the Ways and Means Committee what party the IRS commissioner was from, because the focus was on customer service, on accurate data, on, you know what I mean, just doing a very difficult job the right way. Now, the IRS, from its leadership, has lost that credibility. And so much of the work has been, you know, we've come at it from different angles. However, you know, I think there's areas in, we're seeing cooperation in civil asset forfeiture issues that we share common ground on, that Chairman Roskin's been working on. There's some areas there. I think we'll need a new administration to be able to focus on how should the IRS, I'd love to see the IRS redesigned. You know, any agency with that many problems is begging to be made better. You know, I think stronger and more experienced on the business side. I think far more responsive on the small business and family side. You know, I just thinking ahead would love to see a sort of an independent dispute resolution part of the IRS, where taxpayers, without having to go to court, could go to that neutral process to get that tax ruling, where the agency, where that body has no relationship with the IRS or the outcome. So sort of a smoother, one-stop dispute approach. So there are some good ideas out there about how to redesign the IRS. I think for the balance this year, the focus will be more on the civil asset side of things. Do you have some ideas?
No, I mean, the committee's moving forward with a lot of bills, and the Senate Finance Committee is also moving forward on
Yeah.
the fraud protection bill. So it just seems like an area where, aside from the political problems, obviously at the IRS, but on the enforcement and fraud prevention side, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, you know, though we still run into some philosophical problems on integrity within major tax areas like child tax credit and earned income tax credit. There's different philosophies coming at that. But boy, what's happening now is unacceptable. The amount of money that's wasted in those programs undercuts the programs themselves and the value of it. So, I hope we can find some common ground. I think we'll need a new White House to do it. So.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal which talked about what kind of a chairman you would be, and it mentions Rostenkowski, and I think it mentioned, obviously it mentioned Camp, and it mentioned somebody else. And I think the key thing is, as you said, you leap over, as Steve Jobs did. It's a different time, and I know that you'll take the best from all those folks in the past, plus the joint economic background. So again, thanks so much for
Thank you,
being
Mark.
with us.
Appreciate it. Thank you.